everyone. I'm Rebecca Weber. This is your AMAC podcast, Better for America. If you're not getting your political news from AMAC, then you won't be informed about American politics, so make sure you hit that subscribe button. And to all of our AMACers listening, thank you so much for tuning in. Today we have with us, folks, Steve Cortes. As a former advisor to President Trump, Steve now provides trusted commentary on political and financial issues. Steve's decades of experience as a trader and strategist provides valuable perspective on what's happening in the news. Steve, thank you so much for joining us and welcome to the show.
You bet, Rebecca. I appreciate you having me, and thank you most importantly for the wonderful work you're doing on behalf of a lot of senior citizens in this country, a lot of American citizens who need representation. So I'm a big fan of your organization, and I'm thrilled to be here.
Steve, I'd like to discuss the fabled institutional racism we hear so much about, but in a way some may not even recognize. Bank of America is now targeting minority borrowers by offering a new zero down payment mortgage policy exclusively for Black and Hispanic customers. Can you explain to our listeners why these kinds of policies are dangerous for both our civil liberties and for racial discourse in America?
Absolutely, Rebecca. Listen, this is just intrinsically bigoted, right? To say that we are going to offer a special rate to a group of people based on an immutable characteristic, something they have no control over their pigmentation. It literally violates the Fair Housing Act, both in letter as well as in spirit. And on top of that, I think it's also an incredible betrayal of American citizens who, by the way, saved these giant behemoth banks like Bank America. In total, during the financial crisis back in 2008, 2009, in total, the U.S. taxpayer, between direct capital allocations as well as loan guarantees for Bank of America, $145 billion of your money, of the American citizens of the United States, were put to work on behalf of Bank of America to save that institution during the financial crisis. Well, how does Bank of America turn around and pay back American citizens? In part, at least, by telling white Americans to go pound sand because of the color of their skin. So when I first saw this article, and let me tell you the headline from NBC News, and believe it or not, they didn't see anything wrong with this headline. I mean, they were writing this story as if we're some sort of glowing praise of Bank of America. The headline was, Bank of America announces zero down payment, zero closing cost mortgages for Black and Hispanic first-time home buyers. And the first time I saw that, Rebecca, and as a proud Hispanic American, the first time I saw that, I said, what a terrible idea. How overtly discriminatory, right? And if we want to talk about helping first-time homebuyers, I'm all for that, absolutely. But it should be regardless of race. It should be irrespective of your ethnicity, right? So first-time homebuyer program, absolutely, Bank of America. I think that would be a wonderful program to try to figure out a way, especially in a really tough economy, when it's really hard for people who've never owned a home, especially young folks who might just be getting married, might just be having children, haven't saved up enough for down payment. That kind of a program, absolutely, fantastic. But once you codify it and put it in a silo based on race or ethnicity, to me, that's exactly the opposite of what America wants to be. That's apartheid South Africa coming into the United States, and they're boasting about it. I mean, they and NBC News are boasting about this program. So that's why I wrote an article about it, bemoaning this and saying, number one, I think it's illegal, but number two, even outside of the law, let's just talk about right and wrong. This is something that we do not want to do as a country, and we should not let Bank of America get away with it, quite frankly.
Yeah, our members are with you there, and it really seems to be all part of the administration and leadership really today in America that's pushing for equity, which guarantees an equal outcome over equality, which is equal opportunity. And Steve, if it was the other way around, for example, if it was, only white men can apply for this loan, for example, we would all know that something was wrong with that. So I appreciate you bringing light and shedding light on this issue. It is so important. And we also know that so many Americans are experiencing really unprecedented financial hardships, even despite Biden redefining what an economic recession is. Now, you've been calling attention to sticky inflation and how this impacts Americans. Can you explain sticky inflation?
Those are prices that once they are raised, they rarely, if ever, come back down. They tend to be in the realm of rent, housing, and services. And if we look at sticky inflation, and the Atlanta Federal Reserve Bank actually has an index, believe it or not, that uses this term. They call it sticky inflation. And sticky inflation, unfortunately, has been rising incredibly dramatically. And if you look at the history of inflation, generally, the first sort of chapter, the first phase of inflation is commodity-based. And I'm not saying we're done with commodity-based inflation, but I'm just saying that's the first wave to hit. The second wave then, and in many ways the more problematic wave, is sticky inflation, things like rents. So anybody knows out there who rents their home, if they have renewed recently or if they're looking to renew, they are facing stiff increases. On a national basis, according to apartment.com, 15% right now is the year-over-year median rise in apartments. For the first time in American history, the average apartment rent in America is over $2,000 a month. That has never happened before. Those tend to be incredibly sticky, meaning once landlords raise rates, they almost never lower rates from there. Similar situation for things like veterinary care, medical health insurance premium, legal fees, accounting fees, all of these services that are really important in our lives, they tend to form the stickier part of inflation. That inflation is actually, in my view now, even more problematic. We still have a lot of problems with commodity-based inflation, but that is, to me, the even more problematic aspect of Biden's inflation. And I would like to point out, too, by the way, just for the record, that the Biden administration, as well as the Federal Reserve, and I think both should share blame for this inflation explosion, they lied to the American people all throughout 2021. Fed Chair Jerome Powell, Treasury Secretary Yellen, a lot of folks who should know better and probably did know better, chose to continually tell the American people that this inflation was, quote, transitory. It was a word that they used ad nauseum to the point where it almost became meaningless. Well, there's nothing transitory about this inflation. It is now systemic, it is lasting, and in very many ways, it is sticky. So they deserve the blame not just for the bad policies, but also, quite frankly, for the propaganda, for pushing a false narrative upon the American people that it was transitory when it was not remotely.
Yeah, and when Biden did promise American people who earned under $400,000 a year that they wouldn't pay more in the form of taxes, my goodness, when we see what's happening, we see that the middle class and lower income folks are being hurt the most with this kind of sticky inflation. To be able to afford a 15% rate increase, that's tough to do. So we need to curb wasteful government spending, and it's the rising cost of groceries and gas, cars, housing, not to mention our growing national debt. This is so important.
Right.
But how do we really get out of this? I mean, what do we need to do when we see that homes have increased by 300% and rental rates have been soaring? We're hearing stories of people who are outbid while offering, significantly over asking price. How do we get back to normal?
Right. No, listen, it's a great question because I'm a big believer. We cannot just curse the darkness, right? We have to also light the candle. We have to point the way forward. We didn't make this mess, but I think it's incumbent upon us as American citizens to fix it. And we can, thankfully. There's not easy choices, but there are real options, and there is a path out. To me, the biggest, most effective, and the quickest method to try to fix this inflationary madness is to again unleash American energy. And I think this has to be job one for the new Republican Congress that I believe we're going to elect in November, that will be seated in the beginning of the new year of 2023. The attack on American energy from Joe Biden, to me, was really the genesis. That was the birth of this inflationary quagmire. And again, I think there's a lot of aspects to it, but that was really the beginning. Under President Donald Trump, we had in America not just energy independence, we had energy dominance. We had full spectrum energy dominance. That incredible inheritance, that blessing, was thrown away by Joe Biden for reasons of radical policies and because he wanted to appease a radical eco-green agenda alliance. We can reverse that, though, relatively quickly. And so to me, that is the first major policy shift that needs to happen. And some of the folks out there might be saying, well, wait a second, Cortes, even if we get a Republican Congress, both House and Senate, we still have Biden in the White House, and he's going to veto those kinds of pro-energy measures like enhanced fracking and drilling and pipelines. And that may be true, but let's have that showdown, is what I say. Let's make him make those tough political choices. And by the way, if he says no and we continue with incredibly expensive food and energy, he's going to have to own that, and the Democrats would have to own that into 2024. I'm confident that this may be one of the few areas where Biden's radical White House is actually willing to backtrack a bit, because I think even they see how horrible this is for the American people. So that's the first thing. But then the second thing, which is frankly more difficult, okay, it's a taller task, is to rein in government borrowing and spending. I mean, it's just absolutely out of control. We effectively, Rebecca, we got away with it for a long time in the United States, okay, because we had sustainably low interest rates. But once Biden unleashed this inflation inferno, and that's really what it is, guess what? We no longer have low interest rates in this country. So we can no longer depend on near zero interest rates for the federal government to spend almost at will. That's just not the world that we live in anymore. The 10-year Treasury yield went above 4% for the first time in over a decade just recently. That means that the government has to start getting serious about actually paying its way, just as businesses and individuals do. So that's the taller task for the Congress, and then ultimately for the next president, whichever America First Republican we elect in 2024. I hope it's President Trump, but whoever that is, that's the business of solving inflation in the longer term as well.
AMAC members sure hope that we do see an America First president in 2024, because these kinds of schemes really seem to impact, people who they claim to help. Sir, I wanted to ask you, as a son of a Colombian immigrant, I'd like to hear your perspective on the abuse of U.S. immigration law, because many are entering our southern border under the guise of seeking asylum, while law-abiding, applicants are waiting at the back of the line, sometimes for years. And that begs the question, why is the Biden admin so openly ignoring this important issue?
Listen, it's outrageous. Not only are they ignoring it, Rebecca, I would argue that they are incentivizing it. I mean, I think they're actually stoking the illegality and the chaos at the border because they think it's going to benefit them. I mean, I know that's a very cynical take, but I just think it's the reality. And, listen, you mentioned my own father who came to this country legally. It is such an affront to legal immigrants who did it the right way to come to the United States. It's not an easy process. It can take a very long time. It can be very expensive. And to those folks who obeyed our laws and who are welcomed into this country the right way as new Americans, it's unbelievably disrespectful to them to presuppose that people can just come to the United States based on their own rules or, make up their own set of criteria to come into the United States. That they can just break and enter effectively into our country. Again, just citing my own dad, came on a student visa, wanted to stay, and this is decades ago, but wanted to stay, applied for permission, for whatever reason didn't get it. Well, he left, and then he told me, and I remember asking him once, he came back the day he was allowed back in, the day he did get cleared for a visa, and I said, did you ever consider staying? And he said, I would never do that to this country that I loved and this adopted homeland that I hope to become a part of. So he said, no, but the day I was allowed back, I was back in the United States. And that story's not unique. It's not rare. That's how so many legal immigrants have approached our country and are a great blessing to this country. But what we have right now is the opposite of a blessing. It's absolute chaos. According to the Daily Mail, right now, during the Biden administration, 4.9 million illegal migrants have crossed our border. That's a wholesale breaking and entering. That is a human tsunami of trespassers into the United States, and at a time of incredible economic duress for American citizens. So I think it's always a bad idea to have a porous border. But to have a porous border at a time like this, when America is having a very hard time grappling with its own challenges, and when real wages, to connect it back to the economy, when real wages, meaning incomes that are adjusted for inflation, and that's what really matters in your life, it's not just how much is your paycheck, but how much does your paycheck buy? Well, real wages are crashing for American citizens, especially working class citizens, many of whom, by the way, happen to be minorities. So there's nothing racist about saying we need to have control of our immigration system. We need to guard our borders. We need to guard America's front door for a lot of reasons, but including the economy, because inviting in millions of illegal workers to compete unlawfully and unjustly in the market against American citizens at a time like this, I think it's just absolutely outrageous. In my view, I'm so strong on this issue. When the Republicans, which I believe will take control, I think they need to impeach first Mayorkas, Department of Homeland Security Secretary Mayorkas, for his total dereliction of duty regarding the border. And I think they need to consider impeaching Joe Biden over this. I mean, again, I think this is the first duty of any leader, whether it's a town mayor or a governor or a president, is to preserve public order, to protect his or her people, the constituents. They have willfully decided not to, and instead facilitated what is really an invasion of the United States by illegals. It's outrageous, and I think it demands an enormous response.
It really is. Our members recognize, and they remember, our listeners remember that Joe Biden had a wide open border during the height of COVID while he was forcing mandates, forcing little children to put masks on, letting illegals come across unmasked, unchecked. And then we see, the illegal trafficking, right? The human trafficking and the drugs that are killing our children and our grandchildren. And it absolutely breaks my heart. It's serious stuff. And I think that we've got to see accountability in 2022 after the November midterm elections. We need to secure the border. We need to combat illegal immigration, reduce crime, protect public safety, and certainly defend America's national security. And that's why it's so important that you're here with us today, speaking and sharing, and we've got to make sure that people get out and vote this November. I do have a final question for you, Steve. We really appreciate your time. I want to close out with a message of hope and inspiration for our viewers. Even through all of the negative that we see in the press, we know that there are great leaders that are really affecting positive change for our country. And people like yourself, Steve, can you share with our viewers your vision and actions to accomplish a better future for our members?
Sure, absolutely. And, listen, let me tell you, what we've been talking about are some pretty dire circumstances in the country right now, and I will never sugarcoat that, right? I'll never pretend, play Pollyanna. Things are bad in the United States right now, particularly economically, but in many fronts. And there are created crises from Joe Biden that are really harmful to this country. But having said that, I'm also incredibly optimistic, and I'll tell you why. Because I really believe that the patriotic populist movement, what I mostly refer to as the America First movement, is still a very young political movement in the history of the United States. And as a young movement, we have lots of fits and starts, but the trajectory, in my view, is towards success for this movement. It wasn't just about the election of President Trump, as important as that was. It wasn't just about one election cycle. It is an ongoing movement that continues to gain steam and continues to broaden in terms of its constituencies. And one of those constituencies, by the way, which I spend a lot of time reaching out to, is Hispanic Americans, who are increasingly rallying to the political right and to the patriotic populist movement and to the America First movement and those kinds of candidates. We're seeing some of those candidates who happen to be Hispanic getting elected more and more and standing for office for these November elections. So it gives me great reason for hope and optimism. And I do believe, as bad as the situation is in the United States, we do have solutions. As I mentioned with the inflation, we have solutions. The good Lord blessed us with an abundance of energy beneath our feet. We have to have the will to harness it and to make sure that it serves the American people. And I could go on and on with other aspects of how we fix the mess we're in. So things are dire, but I think there are legitimate reasons to be really, really optimistic and to work very hard. I think, all of us, if we work and pray, that would be my exhortation to your audience. Do two things: work and pray to make this country better, to save this country, to vote, to get everyone who thinks like we do to vote. We're going to organize. We're going to continue to succeed. We are succeeding politically. We're going to continue to, and that political success is going to translate into policy success for the country.
Yeah, great message. And for our listeners, if you're not currently involved, go to amacaction.org. Our members are doing tremendous work to really get out the message. They're stepping up as poll watchers. They're engaging on the local level, on the state level, to ensure that our elections are free and fair. It is such an important time. If there was ever an important time in America to really get out and vote and get involved, now is that time. So go to amacaction.org and check out what we have there. Steve, it was such a pleasure having you with us today. I really appreciate your depth and insight. It really is just so important. So I thank you so much for being with us today.
Rebecca, thank you so much. Thank you.
And I want to thank every one of our listeners out there. Thank you for tuning in today. Go ahead and watch, listen, and track breaking news by downloading our AMAC News app. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you can like, follow, and share wherever you are on social media. Until next time, I'm Rebecca Weber. This is your podcast, Better for America. Thank you for being here. God bless you and have a wonderful evening.